Okay, Shiva and Krishna consciousness. From my understanding, I thought Shiva is the supreme god in deity form, and when at the highest level, I forgot the Sanskrit name. Then when it comes to the Gita and Krishna, the followers claim that Krishna is the Godhead Supreme. Also, I thought that Krishna was an incarnate of Vishnu. And then the last sentence is, I guess that they are both pointing to the same thing. I'm just interested to hear your views. Okay, it might sound like, to some people listening to that might sound like quite a conceptual question, because we're talking about different levels of godliness, like my God trumps your God. I believe, and you get some people, some Hindus are like that. Maybe they're followers of Krishna, and they will say Krishna is the supreme God, and Krishna is a higher God than Shiva, and they will be able to have an argument about that, and they will be able to quote scriptures, and same other way around. There'll probably be worshippers of Shiva who could probably come up with arguments and reasons why Shiva is the higher god, and so on and so on. And I don't worry about that kind of stuff too much. I sort of think they're pointing at the same thing, but I also think you can use the concept of God and your own version of God in a way that feels right for you. So some people say God is personal. So it's a personal God you can actually talk to, you can relate to, you can have a conversation with, you can pray to God, you can devote yourself to God. So there's a personal aspect of God. And other people say, no, God isn't personal. That's a lower form of God. And a higher form of God is impersonal. God maybe is Brahman or something like that. But I think, these are just different ways, different approaches. And superficially or initially, they can be quite different. Maybe you believe that you're God. Maybe you believe that Krishna is the highest God. From my point of view, that's fine. If that's where you're at, if that's your belief, then follow that belief, see where it takes you. And often you'll find it takes you to the same place. What I try not to get into is arguments, because there are different ways. And what can sometimes start off as quite narrow and sectarian can actually blossom and bloom into something quite wonderful and open, which is where I try and steer things, at least, because I think they're all pointing to the same thing. But God's a really interesting one, because some people will have a strong belief in God, and maybe a personal God, or maybe a particular deity, or a particular kind of divinity. And other people are positively allergic to the word God and to the concept of God. And in the very idea of surrendering to God can fill some people with real kind of resistance, real strong resistance. So I'm quite free and easy about the way we relate to these concepts. I think you can have a belief in God, you can have a belief in a personal God, and that's very beautiful. You can use the concept of a personal God without actually believing it, which is also very nice. Or you can not really be that interested in God, and that can work for you too. So that's the way I approach it. Adam, in your question, you mentioned the Gita. The Gita is one of my favorite texts. It's probably the book that got me into sort of that and the Bible. Probably two books that got me into spirituality. And the Gita can be interpreted in so many different ways. I've studied the Gita in Sanskrit, and a lot of the translations are quite biased. So if you get it translated by somebody who thinks Krishna is the highest God, then they'll translate all the verses that make it sound like Krishna is the highest God. And if you get it translated by somebody who's maybe more into a Shankaran type interpretation of the Gita, where maybe the translator thinks that God is impersonal, then they will translate it to that way. But when you look at the Sanskrit, you realize the language is actually very loose. It's not very specific. They use the same words in different ways to mean different things. So just take a simple example like the Sanskrit word Atman, which generally means the self, meaning kind of the big self, or self with a capital S. But when you read the Gita, the word Atman is often used to mean me, as in the little me, as in the separate person. What in Sanskrit was often called the jiva is often referred to using the word Atman. So there isn't, the beauty of the Gita is that different people with different beliefs can read it and work with it. So that's one of the beauties of it. Obviously that creates problems as well, because it's not very specific and precise. It lends itself to different interpretations, and then people can start to fight over which one's best. So my general view is, let other people follow their path. If you're seeking, if you're trying to figure all this stuff out, then follow your path. Get your head down and follow your path. Don't worry about too much about other people, because superficially all these different paths can appear to be very, very different. But when you're at the top of the mountain, so to speak, that's just like figuratively speaking, okay? When you're at the top of the mountain, you can see how all the paths come together. And actually, it's just the same thing in a different way. So there you go. That's a rather, I hope that answer works for you.